All right. Welcome to today's endorsed research webinar from Surviving to Thriving, How to
We
Promote Workplace Thriving in Your Department. My name is
we
Tori
had to go cover the
Nagash,
mailroom because
and
the girl.
I serve as the Research Initiatives Manager at ACUHO-I. A significant focus of the ACUHO-I research agenda is disseminating research about housing and residence life, and endorsed research is one way that we work to achieve this. ACUHO-I and the ACUHO-I Research Committee invite endorsed research applications on issues related to campus housing, including those that align with our research agenda and future of the profession imperative areas. We review applications as they are received on a rolling basis. If you're interested in learning more, you can visit the ACUHO-I website and find information under Research and Data in the Knowledge Resources area. You can also email research@acuhoi.org with any questions. Before we begin, I do have a few housekeeping notes. The live transcript closed captioning feature is enabled, so you can turn on subtitles during the webinar should those be needed. The webinar is being recorded, and that recording will be posted on the ACUHO-I YouTube channel. And you can feel free to post any questions you might have in the chat. I will be monitoring what is shared there, so if you have any technical questions, I will try to assist you. But any questions for our presenters will be answered at the end. All right, I will now turn things over to our presenters for introductions and to get started. Thank you.
Thanks, Tori. That was awesome. Thank you all for being here today. We'll do our introductions real quick, but we're presenting today on some findings from our study around workplace thriving in college housing and residence life. So to give you an idea about what we're doing, we're going to explain a little bit about who we are and what our interest in this research was. Give you a quick overview of our studies, sort of ins and outs, and I have a report that I'll share as a PDF in the chat feature. And then we're going to connect it a little bit to what the literature says around best practices in workplace thriving and cultivating that within workplaces. But we want to leave a good amount of room during the webinar for some breakout discussions and some Q&A based off of these results. Part of what we're hoping to accomplish here too is crowdsourcing some information, some reactions, some ideas that have come out of the research so we can help better situate our implications whenever we're coming up with those within the research. So, to introduce ourselves, my name is Jason Lynch. I go by he, him pronouns. I'm an assistant professor and former residence life professional at Appalachian State University, but before that, I spent almost a decade within college residential life in some other functional areas. My particular research looks at issues of trauma-informed leadership and organizational trauma, and I'm also the co-lead for the ACUHO-I Future of the Profession Community Mental Health Team. And I'll turn it over to my colleague, Brittany.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brittany McDaniel. I use she, her pronouns, and I work at Washington University in St. Louis in the Office of Residential Life. I lead our residential education team and have been working as a practitioner in this field for over 10 years now. I come to also speak to my involvement with the ACUHO-I. I'm also part of the Future of the Professions task force. I'm specifically a part of the workforce sustainability group, and that's a part of the reason of why my interest in this topic is just recognizing there's a lot changing about our workforce in the past few years. I did my dissertation research on staff well-being a few years prior to COVID, and it bled into COVID. And I think my interest in just continuing to explore what does it mean to be doing this work, both as a live-in staff member, but then also as managers, and how are we taking care of ourselves in addition to taking care of our students.
Awesome. Thank you, Brittany. Well, before I get started, I want to kind of prime everybody. So I recognize it's a Wednesday afternoon, so you might just be listening in, which is perfectly fine. But if you're able and you have the ability to do so, get out a piece of paper and a pencil. And as we're presenting some of the information from this study, we're really interested to get your reactions and questions. So feel free to take some notes around thoughts that are creeping up for you, right? So if there's a particular question that's coming to mind, or you might see something, you're like, I have a really great idea to address that part, right? Write it down, because we're going to want to talk about that at the end. So prefacing this is sort of how we collected our data. We used an explanatory mixed methods process. We're in the midst of that, right? This is presenting the quantitative portion of the study. We had 34 participating organizations across the entire country that was representative of all the ACUHO-I regions. So the survey itself was about 60 items. We measured things like workplace thriving, psychological safety, and organizational trauma, but we also have variables related to various demographics and institutional contexts. So in total, from these institutions that we solicited, we had 422 respondents. Comparing that against the total population we were trying to recruit, we had about a 5% margin of error, so it was pretty good for our quantitative results. So what I'm going to present to you are just some of the descriptives. I'll present a little bit of sort of the overall averages, talk about some of the specific items, talk about some particular themes that might be cropping up within the survey. So lead with the overall scores, right? So in this workplace thriving score, it's all of the items that were averaged together, right? Individuals are able to rate themselves on a scale from 1, where they strongly disagree with particular statements, to strongly agree. So as we can see, here we're in a pretty good area, right? It's 4.03 out of 5 for the 422 respondents. One caveat that we would give, right, is as we were recruiting institutions, we were really emphasizing folks that thought that their institution might be thriving, right? So the data could be a little skewed here, because it might be that, okay, like if my organization is going to participate, maybe I'm already kind of confident that there's a sense of thriving within the workplace there. So we looked at workplace thriving through 5 constructs. We used a pre-existing survey from another study outside of housing to measure this particular data for workplace thriving. So the first subscale was desire for involvement, right? So how, to what degree are we wanting to really dig our heels in it, or get our hands dirty in the work that we're doing? So here again, pretty high, 4.37. We had several different items that were used to measure that, right? Things about taking initiative in work, or liking to take on challenges. Obviously, the lowest scoring was I want to be involved in my organization beyond my actual work duties. That took a dip, but I can imagine we all enjoy setting boundaries in that way, right? Also, too, I forgot to mention in the chat feature, this data that you're seeing is in the PDF report. If you have trouble accessing that, just send us a message in the chat, and we'll try to get it to you. Oops. So again, another subscale that we used was feelings of competency. Again, 1 to 5. We see here that feelings of competency was one of the highest rated subscales within the survey. Things like feeling capable at doing their job, that you know what you're doing, that they're effective and competent in their work, and they feel overall confident in their ability to do their work, were the items that made up that particular subscale. Interpersonal fit, right? So relationships within the work was rated at a 4.36. This really looks at sort of the relationships, right, amongst colleagues. So valuing the people I work with, feeling accepted, getting along well with folks, enjoying other folks, and having trust in other people within the work environment. So this one, I put a little note here. So thriving at work is a subscale of the workplace thriving scale overall, right? So when we think about thriving at work, we're thinking about things like making meaning of the work, liking the job that you have, feeling excited, getting a sense of fulfillment around the work. And we see a little bit of a dip here, but we're still sort of in the green, right, for this particular subscale. But I saved these last two, or this last subscale, and we'll talk about this in a second. So this last subscale was the most highly correlated of the 5 subscales with workplace thriving. Is perceived recognition at work. Here you see the scores kind of dip down into the yellow a little bit, 3.93. And at first, when we think about recognition at work, we might think about things like awards or getting nominated for things, or those big grandiose public displays of recognition. But really, it's a little bit deeper than that, right? So folks are wanting to understand that they're being recognized for their abilities, right? That they're bringing something to the organization. They want to feel like they're a full member of the organization, that they're able to express opinions and help in the decision-making process, right? They know that their works are appreciated, or even that I feel that my work is recognized. And in some of the qualitative interviews that we've done so far, at least on my end, I know that this feeling of being recognized is more of those little day-to-day micro affirmations, right? That people give, like, hey, so and so, I saw that you did this the other day, and it really made a big difference. Is not only that recognition, but really going and talking about what the specifics or how those specific actions positively impacted the organization. That's how a lot of folks have been conceptualizing that in the interviews. So like I said, in addition to these 5 scales, we also measured this construct of psychological safety. So we see here too that these is sort of in the yellow, but we also saw that, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in a second, that psychological safety was actually the strongest predictor of overall workplace thriving for the folks that took this survey. So the things that made up psychological safety had to do with, it felt like it had to do a lot with just the way we show up at work, right? Our ability to be creative and have trust in our work. So things like, if I make a mistake at work, my leadership sees it as a learning opportunity and not a failure. It's easy to ask for help at work, or I'm empowered to try out new ideas in my department, feeling comfortable voicing opinions at work. And although it's the lowest score here, is one of the more impactful statements that my leadership in my department trusts their employees. And that's pretty highly correlated with these other items that were making up the psychological safety subscale. All right, so those were sort of the descriptive statistics, right? Just how people straight up answered the questions. But when we look at some of the more interpretive statistics around this particular data, we see that a little psychological safety goes a long way, right? So I just said that, or talked about how psychological safety was the biggest predictor of workplace thriving. If you're familiar with statistical tests or whatever, they talk about like percent of variance explained or whatever. Generally, to interpret that number, a lot of studies in education research around a 20. This was at a 51. It was very predictive of workplace thriving. And what we actually saw is that these are the different sort of subscales paired with the psychological safety, right? And saw that perceived recognition really went hand in hand with psychological safety as well as interpersonal fit. We also see that perceived trust from leadership and empowerment strongly correlates with overall feelings of trust in team members, feelings of recognition and appreciation, and positive interpersonal relationships. And we kind of tease out some of the data here. We see that perceived trust in leadership really goes hand in hand with the ability to try out new ideas. People want to be able to be creative in their work and feel like they're contributing to the overall organizational function and using the education and experience a lot of them come with, right? They want to be able to voice opinions, and they want to be able they want folks to see mistakes as learning moments and not failures, right? So all of these are really tied up in the perceived trust from leadership item. So like I said, I'm kind of going through the data here, wanting to talk a little bit about populations of interest, and then I'm going to hand it over to Brittany for some further interpretation. So when we started comparing different subgroups, right, we collected information about demographics, we collected information about institutional context, but 3 populations of interest really stood out. So when we look at significant differences between staff members, we found that live-in staff had a small but significant, a small but significant decrease in workplace thriving as compared to their live-off colleagues, right? Interestingly, mid-level staff actually had some of the statistically significant least amount of workplace thriving as compared to senior level professionals in the department, and even their counterparts on the live-in roles and the resident directors. And then finally, LGBT staff also seem to have a dip in their workplace thriving scores as compared to non-LGBT staff. We also ran tests on a bunch of different other groups. So we didn't find significant differences based off of race, whether aggregated or disaggregated. And we also found that there weren't significant differences based off of the area of housing operations, right? Whether it was you were in residential education or leadership, or whether you were in housing administration and operations, it all kind of fleshed out the same way. And interestingly, I thought that this was going to be very different, but institution size didn't seem to make a difference in the workplace thriving scores. We had really good representation across different institution sizes. I think we had them categorized in 4 different levels, and there was no significant difference amongst the different levels. We also didn't find meaningful relationships among years of experience or length of time within the department. So we also see that no matter how long you've been in the field or how long you've been in a particular department, there wasn't really a relationship between that and on these items around workplace thriving. So we're in the middle of phase 2 of this project. It's kind of ongoing, and you might hear us reference some of the qualitative interviews that we're doing. We're using a multiple case study format, but what we've done is select institutions that have scored 4 or better in the workplace thriving scale. So out of those 34 institutions. We also picked institutions that are approximately or that had approximately a 50% response rate for the survey or higher. And we've tried to select based off of bed count or organizational size. We're trying to aim for 2 institutional sites per size category. And so within that, we're interviewing 1 entry, 1 mid, and 1 senior level person with each one of those sites. So by the end, I think we're having something like 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, something like 24, I think, interviews that we're hoping to finish up by the end of the semester. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Brittany.
Great. Thanks, Jason. So one of our goals for today was we wanted to spend some time also connecting the data that we collected to the literature and to be able to provide some tangible takeaways for you all to take from the conversation today. 2 general concepts that we wanted to start the this part of the conversation out with is, one is just reemphasizing this idea that the survey predictors have a significant influence on one another. And so Jason spent some time talking about the influence of psychological safety. And so I think that's just really important for us to keep in mind as we go through each of these different constructs. And then the second general concept to keep in mind is this idea of job crafting. It kept coming up in the literature, and it really is a specific process in which an individual can design or influence their job. And so it's a way to find ways to enjoy your work more. It's around how are you changing your perception of your job? How are you choosing to accomplish tasks and developing working relationships, and just, your attitude and approach to your work all around. I think it's both influenced by the predictors that we've been discussing, but it can also have a strong impact on an individual's ability to thrive in terms of like the degree that they're able to craft their job. So the first construct we want to talk a little bit about is this idea of desire for involvement, right? So dedicated and meaningful work, we know, can enable employees to realize just how valuable they are within the organization. It can also increase levels of engagement, but it's really important to note that even if an employee feels engaged, right, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that they're fully satisfied or happy with the workplace. I think that a few things that came up around how workplaces can boost a desire for involvement for their staff is this idea of task autonomy. So going back to, there's many ways to often do the job, and so how are you supporting your staff and thinking about how they approach their work? This idea of intrinsic rewards, which is simply around when you accomplish something, first off, how are you internally feeling pride for the work that you're doing? But also when you're accomplishing a project or a task, how is that building trust with your colleagues as well as your managers, etc.? And these are the things that can really support employee engagement. From a managerial perspective, one way that leaders can support employee engagement is through developing some good listening techniques, being fair and equitable in their approach, having and demonstrating respect, building trust, and taking the time to listen to and understand the concerns of their employees and finding ways to address those. The next construct is around feeling of competency, which is just simply, associated with this idea of high effectiveness and efficiency and being able to do one's job. It's feeling like you know what to do and you're able to do it and do it well. And so some tangible examples in how to support employees and being able to build this confidence and competency is around, thinking really critically about how are you onboarding staff from the beginning, and what does that initial training program look like? How is it aligning not just with the needs of the individual position, but also setting the employee up for success within your department, within understanding the larger institution. And along with that, thinking critically around, continual training opportunities. And so really thinking about how are you scaffolding learning of a role, recognizing that, sometimes it's an information dump when somebody first starts in a role. And so how are you doing being more intentional with spreading that out, and especially for entry-level professionals, building on that over the course of the year to set them up for success. And I think the other piece of that is recognizing institutional needs, right? I think that many of us are going through a period right now of really seeing different needs of our students that are coming into college. And I think financially, things are starting to look a little bit different at many institutions. And so being able to also adjust your training programs to reflect the needs of the institution. And then finally, in terms of building competency, right, it's around looking at personal and professional development opportunities. And so how are you utilizing both internal and external resources to just enhance the development of both your staff within the roles that they're doing, but then also recognizing their people too. And so being able to provide them with opportunities that are going to advance their skill sets as they move forward in their career. The next one is around interpersonal fit. I think, as we know with our students, this sense of belonging is really important to their ability to thrive in college. And for our staff, similarly, a sense of belonging is very important too. And so really thinking about how are we providing opportunities for staff to connect and form relationships with one another that is outside of talking about work tasks at hand, right? And so being able to provide that intentional space where staff can connect. I think the other piece of this around fit really goes into that job crafting that we just talked about a little bit. And so being able to work one-on-one with your employees and thinking about, how are they able to accomplish the goal, the responsibilities of their role in a way that they're able to capitalize on their strengths. And so maybe you're familiar with Gallup Strengths. That can be a great tool to use with your staff to figure out where your strengths lie, and being able to then even look at larger departmental and university needs and thinking about how are you utilizing folks' strengths in terms of accomplishing the work. I think, Jason, you in one of your interviews recently, this came up, if you want to share that anecdote.
Yeah, definitely. So one of our mid-level professionals really kind of hit this idea around like job crafting and strengths-based approaches. And so they part of their duties was residential conduct, but they also have a really big interest in data analytics and data visualization. And so they were able to come up with this sort of dashboard that looked at predictive analytics and sort of data that mapped out the conduct landscape within the residential halls for both the student conduct and residential life leadership. And so in doing that, this person talked about how their supervisors really verbally talked about how much they appreciated it, and were able to make that connection about how it's improving their processes, but then also allocated some resources for this individual to be able to get one, more training, but two, also having more dedicated technology to enhance that. And so this person talked about thriving in the sense that they were like, yeah, I'm getting to engage in this professional development, and I'm also getting to tie in these things that I really like that may or may not have too much direct impact on my work, correlation in my work, but I'm able to find a way to showcase that in different experiences.
Thanks, Jason. The next one we want to talk a little bit about is the perceived recognition at work. And so I think that sometimes recognition can, especially from a managerial perspective, or feel it needs to be like, overwhelming in the sense of how do I recognize folks and what does that look like? But as Jason mentioned earlier in the conversation, it can really, be very much a practice of gratitude in a day-to-day setting, right? And so being able to verbally praise, to share that you appreciate somebody's efforts on a specific project. It can also be, around doing a kudos board, written notes to somebody, or, if, some folks' love language is that being recognized in a public forum. And so that is, something else to consider is when you're recognizing somebody, how are you doing it in a way that is genuine to the receiver, in showing them that they're valued and appreciated. And then the next one is psychological safety. And so I think just recognizing that this is very complex in terms of how you cultivate psychological safety for folks within an organization, and that there's a lot that can influence, one's ability to feel safe. One thing to consider is, position within an organization does influence feelings of psychological safety, and management has a critical role in cultivating these environments. Some of the ways to cultivate this environment can be around being very clear in the norms and expectation that you're establishing, so that way it creates a sense of predictability and fairness. Staff know what to expect, and they know the structure in which they're operating within. I think too, being able to provide space that allows and to cultivate in an environment that really allows for open communication, and to be able to come to the table to actively listen to the needs of staff. And being able to ask probing questions or really get at the root of, what might be going on. And then another part of this is around just making sure folks feel supported, right? And so I think really taking an individual-based approach to this, and support looks different for everybody. And so, how are you coaching both your managers, and then too, like coaching everybody within the organization of being able to identify what do their support needs look like, and how are they communicating that to their supervisor, and, creating this one-on-one approach. And then to draw back to the recognition piece is to, the final piece is around just expressing appreciation and humility when staff share feedback. So I think that feedback can sometimes be hard to hear, but I think being able to provide that space of gratitude for folks to just feel comfortable enough to come forward and share that. I think the other piece, just to go back to job crafting really fast before we move on to the final one, is job crafting is very tied very much to this idea of psychological safety. I think that someone's ability and willingness and motivation to, be able to approach their role and really find ways to make it their own, and can really provide a window to leadership in terms of really understanding someone's feelings around, being able to feel safe within the workplace. And then finally, thriving at work. I think that organizations that help employees find their balance and prioritize their feelings of being cared for, and ensuring that managers are equipped to lead teams just have a really good opportunity in creating this culture that is both supports well-being, but then also, can help staff do their roles well. I think to achieve this, some things they really consider within your workplace is really thinking critically around how are you providing training to your supervisors, so your mid-level, senior level managers. I think that that's something that is an area of growth for many folks within their career, and just always thinking about how you're supervising that next level. being intentional around that development. I think too, evaluating opportunities for job crafting. So I think about this specifically for our entry level staff, and I think recognizing the folks that are coming in right now, we're in school during COVID, and I think that there's just a lot of learning going on around what does it mean to be a full-time employee within the workplace. And so being able to sit down one-on-one and really have those conversations and help them understand how they can make the position their own. And then once again, reinforcing that idea of we do really hard work, very important work, but being very intentional about finding those opportunities for staff to connect outside of their position. So whether that's within your department or even working with colleagues across other departments at your university to think about how staff can connect just outside of the day-to-day work. And one thing that I'll mention is that we got one question ahead of time, just around how to bring this feedback to your leadership. And I think that hopefully the examples that were provided, these are some great ways to maybe suggest some changes that will increase workplace thriving in your organization, and that you're able to make those recommendations and couch that conversation within the examples rather than just talking about so directly the larger topic at hand. And so now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and move into our breakout room discussion, because we really want to hear from you. We want to get your feedback about just what you think about these questions. And so I'm going to go ahead and pop into the chat the link that the QR code goes to. So it's a Google form, it's anonymous, but one person in your breakout room is going to go ahead and complete this form. What we're going to invite you to do probably for about like the next 15 minutes is to be in these spaces and just to go around and do some introductions of yourself. And then we want you to focus on talking about these 3 questions. So from what Jason and I shared today, what information is resonating with you? The next question is, what practices are your institutions currently doing as it relates to fostering involvement, enhancing staff competency, being able to help folks connect with others, recognizing staff, creating an environment that's psychologically safe, and then promoting a place of workplace thriving. And then our last question for you is just recognizing that we view the cultivation of workplace thriving as a continuous process. We'd love to learn just what tools and resources do you need to continue to enhance workplace thriving within your department. Anything else you want to add, Jason?
Nope. I just want to put out there that I attempted to put everybody in groups with sort of like positions, but there was a mass exodus when we said breakout rooms. So I had to scramble and put together some new rooms. So hopefully the majority of folks will be around the same position. So you could have some conversations around what that might look like at that level.
Jason, Brittany, did you see the message in our chat? There's a request from one of our participants to be in a specific breakout group.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, I'll just keep that person out. So let me do this, and then we will open it up. So Teresa, just don't click enter whenever I open this. So it's 3:36. We'll come back at 3:46. Okay. Well, awesome. Well, thank y'all so much for sticking around for some conversation. Hope to see if folks would be comfortable reporting out a little bit about what they talked about, or if you have questions that have come up. This is going to leave plenty of time just to be in conversation with each other here at the end. Also, I want to shout out that I see Teddy Walker in the room. She was one of my first supervisors in residence life. So hi, Teddy. Brooks, go ahead.
I'll just share kind of a theme that emerged from the group that I was a part of is I think especially in the past several years, the folks that are coming into our roles, whether that's graduate, entry level, mid-level, are coming with a different knowledge and skill set than what we've been used to. And so having to adjust and pivot to people that are coming into these roles that may have very limited to no previous direct experience. And so looking at what that transferable experience or having to reshape and recraft roles that maybe weren't necessarily designed for them. Again, the shifting of what used to be master's required, now bachelor's required, master's preferred, or even shifting full-time positions to graduate assistantships.
Definitely. Anybody else?
Hey, Jason, I'll just go ahead and start talking. No need to raise my hand, but we didn't get a chance to get through all the questions in the breakout space, but I will say, look, like hearing your presentation, the data is not as grim as I thought it would be, quite honestly. So that's a bright spot. So I'll summarize my point in our conversation by saying that.
Yeah. Well, and it's been interesting for me in I haven't seen Brittany's side of the interviews yet, so I can only speak for the interviews I've been doing. It seems like a lot like people tend to be surprised around their institution scores being higher than like what they might have expected. But then like whenever you actually go to talk and tease out some of these things, like a lot of where it seems the conflict comes in is sort of the interpersonal pieces, right? And so whenever like we had a subskill around interpersonal fit, but that it seems like there's acute conflicts that happen, and that tends to be what people focus on, but the overall landscape of thriving tends to be pretty okay. So I think that there's something to be said for like how are we navigating and understanding conflict in the workplace that might be an outcome that we didn't measure but is cropping up in sort of the qualitative piece.
Yeah, and then also to that, I think where my mind goes on that is what's our role in that? Like how much of what's happening outside, especially for live-in staff, a lot of their personal relationships, how much do we broker that as leaders?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think like part of it too, and I'll keep it short though, is I think we forget sometimes the new professionals are new professionals, right? I think that we're having this generation come in, particularly after COVID, and like they've just had a different lived experience and the skills that they've been able to develop. And so I remember whenever I was a new professional, boundary setting, like being able to handle conflict, all those things were incredibly new for me. And I think we have this expectation that just because you were 23 and have a master's degree now, that all of a sudden you've developed into a complete mature adult. And I think we have to take more ownership of helping to scaffold and provide professional development around how we handle those things. And I think it's especially important for the live-in staff, right? Because it's a pressure cooker and they never get to go home because their home is at work. So Brittany, I'm sorry, I think I cut you off.
Yeah, well, no, you didn't cut me off. But the thing that I would want to add to that is I think we're doing this study at a really interesting point in time. So I mentioned during my introduction, I was doing my dissertation research, started it right before COVID, did interviews like great in the start of COVID. And I think that we're doing this project right as we're coming out of this, like the past few years have been really hard. And I think that, for the first time in a while, many universities and just workplaces in general, like people are starting to study themselves. And so to add on just something that I've thought about in my interviews is I think that there's two things going on right now is that folks, could have been taking this survey thinking about present, but they're still talking about that they're still lingering effects from the past few years. And so I think to your point, Shannon, because I was surprised as well, is like, oh, wow, these are like pretty good numbers of, how much is it? It's like we're balancing these two sides right now. Like we're still holding on to just some of the trauma from the past few years. But I think more and more folks are starting to I think just study themselves and like feel optimistic and hopeful for where we're going right now. But it's too soon to make those broad statements. So.
Anyone else a reaction or a question maybe that's come up for them?
At least for myself, I see a lot of people who struggle with imposter syndrome, and looking again at your report, the I know I am capable of doing my job, 80% strongly agree, is just staggering to me when I deal with so many people who feel like they feel the opposite of that, or at least that's what they state in that moment. So it's interesting to see that how the research that you've done has on the opposite side. So I hope we caught people at the right time of the mood.
Well, and I think that there's almost kind of two pieces sometimes to the imposter syndrome thing, right? Like I'm a first generation student and I've worked at these like big famous institutions like Berkeley and Duke and all of that. And I remember like I've always felt that I could do my job. Like I felt equipped with that. But I think looking at my surroundings, like I think imposter syndrome takes on a lot of intersections on college campuses, because I was like, well, I'm this poor kid from the swamps in North Carolina. Like I don't have any relationship with the kind of people that I'm seeing around me. And so I think that kind of creates imposter syndrome. And then I think that but just sort of like you can be skilled in your job, but then maybe there's all like you see other people winning awards and all these other things that kind of tie into these things about self-esteem. And when we think about workplace thriving too, one of the questions I always bring up too is how are we incentivizing healthy work behaviors and things like that. Like oftentimes when we award people, we're awarding the people that are working 80 hours a week, and we're not creating any so it kind of reinforces that pattern that that folks need to give until they don't have anything else to give. And then if you're again with the imposter syndrome, if you have a family or other circumstances that doesn't let you work that much and you're not getting those awards and things like that, that could really help get you down in those ways. I think we have time for one more question if anybody has a question or comment or observation. Well, I'm going to put on the screen, this is our contact information. If you're interested in talking about workplace thriving or have a question about the survey or the upcoming studies or just want to chat, feel free to reach out to Brittany or I. We are always up for chatting about this topic. I hope you found this somewhat helpful. I'm going to tap on Tori to see if we could come back in the spring and maybe do a second part to this with our qualitative data and dig into some of these topics a little more deeply. Brittany, do you have anything to close us with?
No, just appreciate you all coming to the conversation today and looking forward to reading through your responses.
Tori, would you like to close us out?
I'll just end by saying that this was being recorded and will be posted on the ACUHO-I YouTube channel. And so that will be available likely early next week. And if there are any follow-up questions, you can always email research@acuhoi.org and I will be happy to assist you.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. Hope everybody
And
has a great week.
also, please come back and present again in the spring.
Yeah. Thank y'all.
Thanks, everybody.